Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Enterprise, Season 2, Episode 23, Regeneration. I don't know, how do you talk about this? I'm going to try not to be critical of it. I understand their hearts were in the right place and that they wanted to do something special. So the problem with doing a prequel, and this is the reason I hate prequels, is it has to flow in a continuity. So, for example, Dr. Phlox is a great character, but we never see Denobulans ever again. And I get it, it's a huge galaxy. So, I mean, there could be Denobulans doing other things in other parts, or maybe there's a disagreement, and so they leave the Federation, assuming they're even part of the Federation. So I get it. It's not ideal, but it is what it is. Now, this being a Star Trek show, they're going to want to do a lot of references to previous stuff that they can't necessarily do. One of the big examples that comes to my mind is the Ferengi. Now, even in Star Trek, the Ferengi have never been handled very well. In The Next Generation, one of the first episodes of The Next Generation, Ferengis have never been seen before. Picard is the first human to actually see a Ferengi. And then they kind of change. They realize that they're not really that scary, so they change the way they move and act and all sorts of stuff. And then we go through, between, so 1987 to Voyager ended in 2001, but we really don't even have to go that far. We can just go to Deep Space Nine. Ferengis are common practice. They're everywhere. Their scientists are on Starfleet vessels. We even get Nog, who is the first Ferengi in Starfleet. All sorts of stuff. So we go from this species that nobody's ever seen to they're everywhere. In my opinion, that's not that great. It's not an ideal character development, but it is still kind of interesting because Ferengis are really fun to watch. So especially with Quark, and he had been on board Terok Nor and stuff like that for 10 years. So why did we never see a Ferengi? It's kind of weird. So anyway, this episode is an example of that, where they're hey, why don't we have another fan favorite alien in an Enterprise episode? Let's do the Borg. Now again, the Borg is introduced in The Next Generation because Q threw us into the Delta Quadrant and is hey, look at this. This is something scary, right? And so they're okay, now how do we get the Borg from the Delta Quadrant to Captain Archer? And they actually do it a pretty smart way. I'm not going to lie, it's kind of clever that they have, this episode is basically a sequel to the movie First Contact. It's actually pretty genius. If you're going to do something, that's the way you do it. But as soon as they get from that point, it just loses all of its momentum, and it just becomes a kind of a cliche storyline where the Borg are found by these scholars. They assimilate them, they assimilate a ship, they try to escape, and Archer blows them up. It's it moves so quick, and there's no development that it kind of loses all of that interest. And then, of course, we even get to the end where they're they sent us code to the Delta Quadrant. And T'Pol's meh, Delta Quadrant won't get that for 200 years. Again, a shout out to The Next Generation, which is roughly 200 years from when this episode takes place. And it's okay, but the Borg would get that sooner because they are moving. And it's just one of those, how advanced were the Borg? At this point, because even in Voyager, we know the Borg were around for hundreds of years, because there was the episode where the guy even says, because he's been in hibernation and shit, and he's yeah, the Borg don't really do anything. They just kind of stay in their own little sector, so they've clearly advanced. Who knows? Maybe it's because of this episode. Maybe they get that transmission, and that's what helps them expand. You never know. I've always been kind of a fan that the Borg is somehow tied into V'ger. And there's all sorts of novels and fan fiction and everything like that to explain the Borg. But, I mean, personally, if it's not in an episode, I'm going to kind of make up my own theories. So, overall, it's an okay episode, but I liked the idea, the premise behind it, but it fell flat. Like, they needed to think it out a little bit more. Supposedly, if there had been a season 5, they were going to do a follow-up episode and even have like the Borg Queen return, stuff like that. Could have been interesting. I mean, Voyager even like toyed with ideas of like entire episodes that did not have the cast. So, you know, if they had done like an entire episode of just the Borg trying to figure their shit out, and like maybe she was the first queen or something like that, it could have actually been really good. Like, it didn't need to have the Enterprise crew necessarily. So, for those who have seen this one, what did you guys think about it? What did you think about seeing the Borg in Enterprise? Go ahead, let me know, and I will see you guys next time for First Flight.